Hiya, Amy here with Amy's Wares, and in today's video I'm going to show you how I use my Arteza Real brush pens and use up some of my backgrounds that I had lying around. To start, I'm showing you the cute little stamp set from My Favorite Things called We Belong, and some Strathmore Bristol smooth paper. That's the optimal paper to use with this sort of water brush pen. I have a waterproof pigment ink, my stamp chamois and my stamp chamois case from Makeup by Marco. And to start, I'm just going to stamp off the images with my Misty stamping platform. And I'm using pigment ink. Now this will take a long time to dry, especially on the Bristol smooth paper, because it does have kind of a clear coating. So you definitely want to either heat set it, wait an exceptionally long time, or maybe even drop some clear embossing powder on it, and then that will give you some nice raised wells to color within. So just bear that in mind. Ask me how I know, or watch my other video about this. But anyway, I stamped them multiple times to get good impressions. Here I'm showing you the water brush pens from Arteza and the real brush pens. Now these are very comparable to Zig clean color markers, if you're familiar with those. They have the brush tip and they are water based, and they function very similarly to those. So I have the full set syndrome. I do have all the colors, but I picked out some neutrals and some yellows and a dark gray for the bee, and then I'm just going to show you how I use these markers. I do have a previous video where I go more in depth about this coloring process, and I do some in real time so you can see how long it actually takes. But in true Amy fashion with my lazy crafting, it is a pretty quick process. So I do like using these sometimes if I'm not in the mood to use my alcohol markers, because you can get such a beautiful gradient with just one color. And as you can see, I'm just dropping in the color darkest in the points where I think there would be a natural shadow, and then I use the water brush pen to just really kind of pull the pigment out. You can see I already went outside out of the lines, shocker. And you can fix it easily by just using either your brush, if you're using just a regular watercolor brush, or this brush pen. Just add a little bit of water and use your paper towel, and you can really fix your mistakes. So here you can see I'm just going back in. It hasn't fully dried, but I'm just adding a little bit more dimension in. I wanted it to be a little bit darker. And then I'm going to move on to this other bear, and I want to show you a different way that you can use these. If you're not comfortable putting the marker directly to paper, you can actually smear some of the ink down either on a piece of acetate or like I have here on a stamping block. And then you can kind of just use it like a liquid watercolor or a regular watercolor. And it gives you a much more even wash to start, which again, you can work in layers and build it up to give yourself more of a natural gradient. But this is just one additional way that you can use these markers, which I enjoy too. It just kind of depends on the image and what I feel like doing at that point. So I get this even wash of color, and then I kind of go back in and add a little bit more concentrated pigment just to kind of add those shadows back into the image. And you can see it's really blooming like you would get with a wet on wet technique with watercolors. So it's kind of a very similar outcome. And you can heat set these as you go, but I prefer to let them dry naturally. As you can see on that little bear on the left, you got a natural kind of watermark, which can happen sometimes. Typically I like it. On this particular stamp I found it a little bit distracting because it's right on his big old head, but normally I like it and leave it be, but you will see later on in the video I actually go back after it's kind of dried even and use my water brush pen just to kind of feather that out and make it a little bit less drastic because it is a bit too much. So on this little cutie patootie bear with the flowers, I wanted him to have that soft velvety gray look, so I used one of the gray markers, and same thing, just kind of dropped in where I thought the darkest points would be, and then just used the water brush pen to pull the pigment out in a wash over the rest of the image. So you can see I'm kind of hopping around just like regular watercolor, if you work on one section, maybe let it dry back a little bit before you move on to the next, and then you won't really have the colors bleeding together. So that's another benefit of stamping multiple images at once. You can kind of hop around from image to image and let that little section dry back a little bit before you move on to one right next to it. So that way you won't have any colors bleeding into each other. Now this Bristol Smooth paper, it is not technically a watercolor paper, but it can handle water much better than a regular cardstock. If you tried to use this medium on a regular cardstock, first of all, it would probably pill and tear, and second of all, especially if you did ink to paper, you wouldn't be able to blend it out like you're seeing me do here. Now you can use a watercolor paper, which will absolutely hold up to the water, but it won't blend as well as you're seeing me being able to do here. Again, because it doesn't have that plastic coating over it, or that smooth coating, and it will have a tooth. So a watercolor is intended to hold a lot of water. So a watercolor paper will really just suck that ink in, and then you won't really be able to move it around. So if you're going to use something like your Zig Clean Color pens or these Arteza water brush pens, then do yourself a favor and get the Strathmore Bristol Smooth paper, because it makes all the difference in the world with this technique if you want to move this color around and blend it around. So I'm just working through, trying to work in these little tiny areas with these bees and get in these little tight spots, which is a little difficult. An alternative here, you could use a fine liner pen to color these in, or maybe like a little gel pen or something like that, but I did make it work. You can see already the difference between the two techniques with the bears, one with the direct to paper and one with just using the wash of color off of the stamping block. It makes a big difference. So I'm just coloring in the little fishing bobber and kind of filling in the little details. I have a very icy blue, it's almost like a gray blue, and I'm putting that on the wings of the bees just to give them a little something and not leave them pure white. But you can see how they're drying back, and I just really like the look. It's a messy watercolor look. I did color these other ones off screen as to, you know, not take up your whole day. But now I have 6 cutie little bears and 6 little bees. So let's turn these into some cards. Now here is an optional step. I did leave my stamps in my MISTI, and the reason being is I wanted to be able to come back in and stamp them again one more time. Now these Arteza brush pens don't really muck up the lines of the image per se, but I really wanted to give them that crisp, defined edge. So when I think about it, I will do this. I left the images right in the MISTI, and then that way they're in the exact same position, and when I'm done coloring and when they're fully dried, I can go back in and stamp over them again, just to get that nice dark black line around the image. So you'll see I'm just going to stamp that on both sides, just to give it that little extra something. So that's what I'm doing here. And I am really pleased how these turned out. These are just a fun alternative sometimes. Sometimes I love coloring with my alcohol markers. Other times I feel like this is more my jam. So it's really just what you're in the mood to use, what, you know, what products you have in your crafty arsenal. So this is just a nice alternative for you. And like I said, I like to batch. I like to create a lot at a time. So sometimes this quick process just really fits the bill. So those are done. Just showing you the images here. And just like regular watercolor, when you leave them be, sometimes they have such a cool look. Now this, that cool box was actually a chocolate box that my dad brought over for Christmas. It had some yummy chocolates in it, but it was such a pretty box I had to keep it. And it was the perfect size to hold all these rando backgrounds that I have. I don't know if you're like me, but sometimes I just feel like making backgrounds, so I'll make a million based on a technique that I've seen or wanted to try, and then other times I'll just kind of put all the pieces together like I'm doing today and making some cards. So I'm just kind of flipping through, got some watercolor, got some stenciled, some embossed, And I picked these different panels that I decided I wanted to use, and then just put all the little fussy cut critters all around them. And then I'm just going to put them together. So I have some A2 card bases ready to go. I have those Altenew alpha dies. Decided to cut some adhesive backed foam and then glue some white cardstock letters on top of it. So I basically made them stickers, and I decided to use the little cutie bear as the O. And this is actually just an ink blended and splattered background. I used a cool dye to get that edge look. And these are actually Tailored Expressions simple strips. It's the dye. Sometimes I'll just cut, out of white and out of black, and then I'll have these little strips ready. And I forgot I wanted to not use the U in the sentiment, so you'll see I masked off the U and restamped it on a smaller strip. Now I'm just using adhesive and attaching all the pieces. And the Y and the U, like I said, are actually glorified stickers at this point because I did use the adhesive backed foam sheets to cut that out. And I will link all the products used in the comments section. If you expand the details and scroll down, I'll have all the details there for you. So I'm using some little foam bits to kind of pop up the bear so that he's the same height off the card as the Y and the U. And then I have these Doris thin foam strips. These are amazing for these little Tailored Expressions simple strips. I use them all the time and they're the perfect width. Here I have some wonky stitched dies. That's what I used on this. This was actually just a gel press, probably where I'm just, rubbing off the brayer, and there wasn't much to it. So then I used the cool dot circle stencil with some glitter gel as to not waste that panel, and then kind of, zhuzh it up a bit. So, and I finished it off with that wonky stitch die for the finished edging. And on this one I decided I wanted to make it a baby card. So you can see I have all these simple strips from Tailored Expressions. They work brilliantly with my batching mentality, so I just thought that little sleeping bear looks so cute and would make such a nice baby card. So that says, "Welcome, little one." And you'll see better pictures of the cards at the end too. I know the lighting is a little bright. I don't know if you saw my daughter's little hand in there. She was inspecting the foam roll. She wanted to check it out. She was actually sitting there watching me. I was doing this at the kitchen table randomly. I just didn't feel like being in my craft room and the lighting was better. So she was kind of helping me put stuff away as I was making a colossal mess on the table, as usual. I don't know if you guys are messy crafters like me, but I am legit train wreck. So I do always pick up afterwards, so at least there's that. But oh goodness, I make a mess. So this one I wanted to use just the little bees and the little cutie sentiment. So I took 3 bees by themselves for this one, and it says "We belong together." Super cute. And popping the little bees up with these little foam squares just to give them some dimension. And I used some liquid glue on where this bee overlaps onto the sentiment, just so it's kind of attached well. Using more of that foam tape. This is from scrapbook.com, and boy is it sticky. It is no joke. So I used some of that. And now it's got some nice dimension and shadow all over the card front. This was actually, this panel I believe was just me cleaning off my blending brushes during some other project, if I believe, because if you look on the back of it, there was all that, hot mess ink blending, so I'm pretty sure that's what I used it for. Here, this was ink smushing. There's some shimmer to it, so I must have done some, perfect pearls mixed in with distress oxides, I would imagine, and some ink smushing, and then I put it through a little cheapy embossing folder, I think from Joanne. My husband detests this one. He's younger than me, and for some reason has an aversion to all things that are 80s. I tease him that he's like 12 and he's just not old enough to have an appreciation for the 80s, so he's not that much younger than me, obviously, but we have a good little row over that every now and again because I just don't feel he loves and appreciates the 80s as much as he should. But For some reason, anything that's like pink or bright or smushed or something like this, it reminds him of the 80s and he's not a fan. But anyway, I like how this turned out. I thought it was super cute. And I decided to turn it into a birthday card. So I used some Tailored Expressions simple strips for that. Just kind of attached all the pieces. I didn't do dimension on the bear or the strip on this one because I did do dimension behind the panel itself. And this one was gel press, again, just whatever sheet I used to wipe off the brayer. And I didn't want it to go to waste, so I used a star embossing folder just to kind of give it a little something. And this one I decided to use the full sentiment that I stamped earlier, as to not have that go to waste. And I think I'm going to send this to my husband's grandpa because he loves fishing and he's on his own now and he appreciates my cards, so I think I'm going to send this one to him. And this one, this layered Simple Trees stencil from A Colorful Life Designs. Ugh, I love that stencil, but I thought this was cute. I was tempted to make this into another baby card, but then I thought, you know, adulting is hard, and I know I'm tired like that little bear all the time, so I just thought it was a cute pairing, maybe a little unexpected. So it says, adulting is hard, friends help. So I popped that up with some dimension with the foam strip and then the scrapbook foam tape, and that finishes that one. This one is actually my husband and my daughter's favorite card. This was a gel press with the mid-century pod stencil, and then I went through and dry embossed it with a different stencil called the corner stencil, and I have a video about that process of different ways to dry emboss, so I'll link that up in the corner as well if you want to check out that video. This one just seemed sunshiny, so this sentiment fit the bill. You are my sunshine. Just kind of popping up the elements. As you can see, there's not much to this process. It's kind of just putting the little pieces together and making it suit your fancy. You know, whatever look you want to go for. I popped a couple of them up with the foam, and then the other one, I believe, I just glued down. So here's the finished cards. Let me know which one is your favorite in the comments. I love how they turned out, and I love using up some of the things that I amass, like the backgrounds. I have so many of them, so sometimes it's nice to just sit down and make some finished cards for your stash, either for, you know, sending out to loved ones, or if you're part of a card drive or anything like that. If you know me at all, you know batching is my jam, so I make a lot of cards at once. And I really like how that We Belong turned out. It's pretty simple. But I will link all of the supplies in the video details, so just expand that and scroll down for that information. And I'll also have details in my blog post with finished pictures if you want to check those out. So if you enjoyed my video, please hit the thumbs up and consider subscribing to my channel. And if you hit the bell, then it'll notify you anytime I post a new video. So I hope you enjoyed this today. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Thank you.